It was just after sunset in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where people waved from porches and trusted the silence of their lawns. But on this night, the calm shattered. A white woman, new to the neighborhood, saw a black man standing at a front door, fumbling with his keys. Her heart raced, suspicion rising faster than reason. She didn't recognize him, so she assumed the worst. Moments later, sirens blared. Neighbors peeked through curtains, and as blue lights painted the white walls of the house, she was certain she'd done the right thing, until the truth unfolded, and her entire world came crashing down. For the past month, Margaret Hayes had prided herself on being a good neighbor. She just moved into the quiet cul-de-sac on Maplewood Drive, a street lined with manicured lawns, trimmed hedges, and people who looked like her. Every morning, she walked her dog past the same homes, waved to the same faces, and exchanged polite nods that never went deeper than, "Good morning." To Margaret, safety meant sameness. Anything unfamiliar meant risk. When a moving truck appeared next door one spring afternoon, she watched carefully from her window. A black man, tall, calm, with gentle eyes, stepped out and began unloading boxes. He smiled at her once. She didn't smile back. His name was David Carter, though she didn't bother to learn it. He'd recently inherited the house from his late mother, a woman who had lived there for 30 years before Margaret ever arrived. But in Margaret's mind, the image of a single black man in a white neighborhood stirred unease. She told herself it wasn't prejudice. It was just being cautious. Weeks passed. David came and went quietly, mostly at night after work. Sometimes he wore paint-stained clothes, sometimes a business shirt. Always polite, always invisible. Until that night, the night the lights went out in her own home, and she saw him across the lawn, standing at his own door. Her mind filled in the blanks. She called the police. And in those 5 minutes of doing the right thing, she set in motion something she could never undo. The call was short. "There's a man trying to break into the house next door," she told the dispatcher, her voice trembling. By the time she hung up, red and blue lights flashed against her living room walls. David had just returned from a 12-hour shift at the community hospital, still wearing his badge from the maintenance department. He carried groceries in one hand, his keys in the other. He barely noticed the patrol car pulling up until a voice shouted his name. Neighbors emerged, whispering. Margaret stood on her porch, arms folded tightly. She told herself it was her duty, protecting the neighborhood, keeping everyone safe. But when officers stepped toward David, she saw confusion cross his face. He explained calmly that this was his house, that he had proof inside, but the officers hesitated. One reached for his holster. Another ordered him to keep his hands visible. David complied, slowly, carefully. Yet the unease in the air thickened. Someone filmed from across the street. Another neighbor murmured, "What's he doing here anyway?" The keys slipped from David's trembling hands, clattering onto the porch. The sound echoed through the silence like a gunshot. And then, the moment that would haunt her forever. An officer shoved him to the ground. Margaret flinched but didn't move. Fear rooted her in place. She told herself it wasn't her fault, that she didn't mean for it to go this far. David's ID and mail confirmed the truth within minutes. The officers' tones changed. Their hands relaxed. The lights dimmed. But by then, the damage was done. David sat up slowly, his shirt torn. His groceries spilled across the porch, milk leaking into the cracks of the concrete. His expression was empty, quiet, resigned. Margaret felt her stomach twist. She wanted to speak, to apologize, but the words stuck in her throat. The officers left. The crowd dispersed. Only the sound of crickets filled the humid night air. Later, as she lay in bed, Margaret replayed the moment again and again. His face, his calm, the terror she'd helped unleash. For the first time, she questioned not what she saw, but what she'd chosen to see. The next morning, the entire neighborhood was talking. Videos of the incident had already surfaced online. The headline read, "Black homeowner accused of breaking into his own house." Margaret's phone buzzed endlessly, calls from reporters, messages from friends asking, "Was that you?" Her face wasn't in the video, but everyone knew. For days, she stayed inside, curtains drawn, too ashamed to face anyone. Across the lawn, David's house remained quiet. The once friendly neighbors now looked at her with silent judgment. One afternoon, she saw him on his porch, hammering the broken latch back into place. She watched through the blinds, guilt burning deep inside. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He just looked tired, as if this was one of many indignities he'd already survived. Margaret tried to distract herself, cleaned the house, baked bread, tended her garden, but nothing eased the weight pressing on her chest. A week later, she saw him again, this time helping an elderly neighbor fix her fence. He smiled gently, as if the world hadn't humiliated him days earlier. That night she couldn't sleep. The truth gnawed at her. All her life, she'd believed racism was something other people did. But she had looked at a man's skin and decided it meant danger. She hadn't seen the house he grew up in, the mother he'd cared for, or the long days he worked to afford it. She had seen only what fear told her to see. And now, every time she passed his home, she saw not a stranger, but her own reflection staring back at her through a window of shame. 2 weeks later, Margaret finally gathered the courage to knock on his door. Her hands shook. Her throat felt dry. When David opened it, she froze. Words felt meaningless against what she'd done, so she simply handed him a letter. It was an apology, long, handwritten, unguarded. She admitted her fear, her ignorance, her guilt. She wrote that she was sorry not just for calling the police, but for every quiet thought that had made her believe she was right to do it. He read it silently, then nodded once. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, just acknowledgement. She walked away in tears. Over time, things changed subtly. She began volunteering at the same community center where he worked. She listened instead of assuming. She learned the names of neighbors she'd once only described by color. Months later, the same cul-de-sac held a summer block party, its first in years. David grilled food, laughed with kids, and when Margaret offered to help, he didn't hesitate. They never spoke of that night again, but the silence between them carried understanding. A fragile truce built not from words, but from growth. The world didn't change overnight. People still judged, still whispered. But Margaret had learned something irreversible. Racism isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides behind fear disguised as caution, behind the quiet comfort of being normal. As she watched David teaching neighborhood children how to fix bicycles, she realized the cruel irony that the man she once feared had become the safest person on the street. That night, under the soft hum of porch lights, she whispered to herself, "I thought I was protecting my home, but I was the one who needed saving." Sometimes, the hardest thing to see is the prejudice we carry in silence, because racism doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears a smile, a title, or a good intention. So before you judge a person, ask yourself, are you seeing them for who they are, or for what you've been taught to fear?